My name's Alan, I'm 61, and up until last Thanksgiving, my kids thought I was just their aging, washed-up dad who never quite made it. That's the word my daughter used once, washed up. I pretended I didn't hear it at the time. Just smiled, nodded, and offered her more mashed potatoes. That's kind of been my role for the past 15 years. The quiet one, the giver, the easy target. My son Jake and daughter Stephanie are both in their 30s now, successful, confident, and frankly, entitled. They grew up watching me struggle to keep the lights on. Their mother, my ex-wife, left when they were in middle school. She couldn't take the uncertainty anymore. Said I wasn't ambitious enough. So she remarried some guy in finance and left me with two hurt, angry kids who eventually grew into two cold, dismissive adults. I never blamed them for resenting me back then. Kids don't know how to process abandonment. But over the years, that resentment hardened into something meaner, something uglier, something that settled deep into the way they looked at me, talked to me, treated me. They were both raised in a house where every dollar mattered. I tried so hard to shield them from it. I skipped meals so they could eat. I worked part-time gigs while trying to launch this tiny little software tool in the evenings. They never saw the late nights, the panic attacks, the years of coding, tweaking, testing. They just saw the empty fridge and the busted-down car. And they never let me forget it. Not when they hit their 20s. Not even when they had kids of their own. Jake works in cybersecurity. Stephanie's a corporate lawyer. Both brilliant. Both highly paid. And both fully convinced that every little holiday gift or favor they did for me was some kind of benevolent act of charity. When my old Corolla broke down last year, and Jake helped me get a used Prius, he spent the next 6 months reminding me how some people don't know how to build equity. Stephanie would call every so often to check in, and the conversations would inevitably lead to comments like, "You should really consider assisted living before things start getting sad." They acted like they were parenting me. I never asked for money, never even hinted. But somehow, I was always treated like a burden anyway, a weight they were graciously dragging behind them. So when last Thanksgiving rolled around, I wasn't exactly eager. But tradition is tradition, and I told myself maybe this year would be different. Jake was hosting, as usual. Big modern kitchen, granite countertops, 3 ovens, for reasons I still don't understand. His wife, Alicia, greeted me with her usual tight smile. I brought a pie. Store-bought. Still warm. I gotta look for that, too. Dinner started off fine, if you could call it that. The grandkids were glued to their tablets. Stephanie spent most of the time scrolling through her phone. Jake lectured me about some new AI security threat like I was a senile nursing home patient, and I just nodded politely between bites of turkey I'd cooked better myself 100 times over. Then Stephanie made a joke about my flannel shirt, something about Dad's permanent garage sale aesthetic. I laughed, because it was easier than asking her why she thought it was okay to mock me in front of my grandkids. And then Jake leaned back in his chair, glass in hand, and said it, casually, like he was commenting on the weather. "You've basically been broke your whole life, Dad. We've had to carry you." It wasn't even said with venom, just flat, matter of fact, like he was stating a fact from a textbook. I set my fork down. Not hard, just gently. I looked up. Stephanie didn't even blink. She smirked, then added, "Honestly, you'll be lucky if we even visit when you're in a home. You should start thinking about that, by the way." I swear, the room got quieter. Not completely silent. Alicia was still fussing with the gravy boat, but quiet enough. Enough that I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. For a second, I didn't say anything. Not because I didn't have something to say, but because I was waiting. Waiting to see if they'd realize what they'd just done. Waiting for a flicker of guilt. Some ounce of awareness that they were talking to the man who sacrificed everything to make sure they never felt the hunger or fear he grew up with. But there was nothing. Just smugness. Confidence. Superiority. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone. Now look, I don't need validation. I didn't build my company for applause. I built it because I believed in it. Because it solved a very real niche problem in back-end optimization for legacy systems. A problem nobody else was paying attention to. It took years. But last fall, a mid-sized tech firm in Austin bought me out. Full acquisition. Stock and cash. Final valuation? Just over $12 million. After taxes, it was still enough to ensure I'd never have to answer to anyone again. I didn't tell anyone. Not even my closest friend. Definitely not my kids. Not because I wanted to hide it, but because I wanted to see who they were when they thought I had nothing. And on that night, I saw them, clearly. So I looked up at Jake, then at Stephanie, and I smiled. Calm, steady, no anger. Just that quiet certainty that comes when the last piece of a puzzle falls into place. Funny, I said, tapping my phone. I sold my startup for $12 million last year. Their faces didn't react at first. It was too out of left field. Then Jake's eyebrows twitched. Stephanie stopped chewing. Her glass froze midair. And after tonight, I added, not a cent goes to either of you. I looked around the table. You think I'm broke, that I need carrying. But the truth is, I've just been watching, listening, seeing who'd treat me like a man worth respect, even when they thought I had nothing. And it turns out, the two people I raised can't even manage that. That's when the forks hit the floor. Literally. Jake dropped his. Stephanie sat back like someone had slapped her. Alicia blinked like she'd just realized the stove was on fire. The grandkids finally looked up from their screens. I stood up slowly. I adjusted my collar and took one last glance around the table, the turkey half-carved, gravy spilling down the side of a porcelain dish, Jake still frozen mid-expression like his entire worldview had just cracked open. It felt peaceful, not triumphant, not vengeful, just still, like a lake after the storm passes. Stephanie's mouth finally moved, barely a whisper. Wait, what? I didn't answer. I didn't owe her one. Not yet. I walked over to the counter where my pie sat, untouched. I took it, gently, cradled it like it actually mattered. And then I turned toward the door. Dad, hold on, Jake said suddenly, standing up so fast his chair screeched against the tile. What do you mean 12 million? Are you being serious right now? His voice cracked slightly, like he didn't trust his own ears. I paused at the door. I'm always serious, Jake. You just stopped listening a long time ago. Then I stepped outside. The air hit me like a reset button. Cool. Crisp. Somewhere down the block, a neighbor's Christmas lights were already blinking, even though it was still Thanksgiving. I walked down the driveway to my car, heart pounding, not with nerves, but release. After years of biting my tongue and nodding through thinly veiled jabs, I had finally said it. Not with spite. With clarity. I sat in the car for a long moment before driving off. No one followed. Not yet. Anyway. The next day, I turned off my phone. I didn't want apologies. I didn't want damage control. I didn't want them suddenly acting like I was someone worth calling just because I had money. They'd already shown me what I was worth to them before they knew. And that was enough. But by Saturday morning, I had over 20 missed calls between the two of them. 4 voicemails from Jake. 2 from Stephanie. 1 awkward text from Alicia asking if I maybe wanted to get coffee and talk. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because I needed them to sit in it. The silence. The realization. The consequences of casual cruelty. On Sunday, I went to the bakery downtown, the one with the chalkboard menus and jazz playing on a loop. I ordered a coffee and sat by the window, just watching the street for a while. An older couple walked past, holding hands. A teenager helped his grandma out of a car. People just being decent to one another. My phone buzzed again. I turned it over. Stephanie. She texted, "We need to talk. Please." I stared at it for a moment. Then I tapped open the text thread. Scrolled up. Scrolled past messages she'd sent earlier that year. "Can you Venmo me $50? I thought you were watching the kids this weekend. Are you sure you're okay on your own?" They weren't malicious. Just careless. All assuming I was a man on the decline, a sad shadow slowly sliding into irrelevance. Never a peer. Never a father worth actual respect. Just a relic. I didn't respond to the message. Instead, I opened my email. Drafted something I'd been thinking about for a while. Subject: Final update on my estate. Hi all, I wanted to inform you of some changes regarding my will and estate planning. After a lot of reflection, I've decided to redirect the bulk of my assets toward causes and individuals who have shown me genuine respect, love, and kindness, especially when they thought I had nothing to offer in return. This includes donations to educational programs, some close friends who supported me for decades, and a few community scholarships in your names, for children whose families may not have had the same privileges you did growing up. I hope you understand that this isn't punishment. It's alignment. Take care, Dad. I read it over 5 times before hitting send. The fallout didn't take long. Later that afternoon, Jake showed up at my door. Not alone, he brought his son, Ben. The kid looked confused, like he didn't understand why his dad was suddenly so panicked. I opened the door, stood there quietly as Jake launched into a speech about miscommunication and emotions running high, and how we've always loved you. Dad, you know that, right? I nodded. Then I looked at Ben and said, "You want some pie?" He nodded. I led him to the kitchen while Jake just stood there, stunned, probably wondering why I wasn't reacting the way he expected. I gave Ben a slice and asked how school was. We talked about Minecraft and math class and the new bike he wanted for Christmas. He laughed with his mouth full. For a second, it almost felt like family again. When they left, Jake looked at me like he wanted to say more. Maybe beg. Maybe argue. But I closed the door softly and turned the deadbolt. The next few days were a blur of texts, emails, long voicemails full of half-baked apologies. Stephanie showed up too, alone, and tried to spin it all as just jokes, harmless teasing, and how you've always been a bit sensitive, Dad. That's when I finally snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, but firmly. I looked her in the eyes and said, "You mocked me, belittled me, laughed at me in front of my grandkids. You made me feel like a charity case, like a burden. And the worst part? You didn't even notice. Because in your mind, it's always been about what I owe you, not what you owe me." She didn't speak. Her lips just pressed together like she was holding in 1,000 retorts. I added, "You had your chance. Now someone else gets one." Then I closed the door again. This time, she didn't come back. It's been 2 months since then. I've met with my lawyer, set up the scholarships, rewritten the will. I even reconnected with my brother, Sam, someone I hadn't spoken to in 20 years because my kids never liked Uncle Sam's weird hippie attitude. Turns out, he's a pretty great guy when you don't view him through a lens of judgment. But the real kicker? The part they still don't know? The $12 million? That's just the initial buyout. There's a second equity clause that kicks in if my software hits certain benchmarks. And if the projections hold, the total payout could triple. But I don't need it. Because the real wealth was finally learning who deserved a place at my table and who only came hungry. And speaking of tables, I haven't told you what happened at Christmas yet. Christmas was different. Not in the way you decorate a little less or skip the eggnog. I mean fundamentally different. The kind of different where you feel the shift in your bones before the day even starts. I woke up in my new place, a smaller, single-level home just outside town. Cozy, quiet, paid for in full. I made myself a proper breakfast. Eggs, bacon, cinnamon rolls from scratch. Not because anyone was coming over. Just because I could. No microwave oatmeal. No last-minute runs to Jake's to be the grateful guest. Just me. Alone. And free. The invitations never came that year. No family potluck. Invite from Alicia. No guilt-trippy text from Stephanie pretending I was always welcome as long as I brought drinks and didn't talk politics. I guess after the Thanksgiving reveal and the estate email, they figured I was done. Or maybe they were too embarrassed to look me in the eye again. Either way, I didn't mind. I already had plans. You see, I didn't just cut my kids off. I didn't just walk away. I walked towards something. I reached out to the people who'd always been on the sidelines. The ones who never asked for anything but showed up when I was sick. When my roof leaked. When I needed help moving the server rack I once kept in the garage back in the early startup days. My old neighbor, George. My friend Linda from the library. Even my first employee, Mark, the one who stuck with me for 3 years without ever cashing a real paycheck. I invited them to Christmas. At first, they thought I was joking. George actually laughed and said, "Me? At your place? You sure your fancy kids won't mind?" I told him, they're not invited. And so, on Christmas Day, my modest little home filled up with laughter, the smell of baked ham, and the sound of people talking like no one was recording, like no one was judging. Linda brought this board game no one understood. George burned the gravy and blamed the stove. Mark showed up late and still got the biggest slice of pie. We didn't care. Nobody was trying to impress anyone. Nobody was sitting at the table just waiting to brag about their new car or humble brag about a promotion. It was messy and loud and imperfect. It was the best Christmas I'd had in decades. We even went around the table saying what we were grateful for, something Alicia used to force everyone to do with fake smiles. But this time, it felt real. When it came to me, I didn't mention the money. Not once. I just said, I'm grateful I finally realized who my real family is. And that it's never too late to choose better. They clapped. George got misty-eyed. Linda toasted with orange juice. I'll never forget that moment. 2 days later, Stephanie emailed me. No greeting. Just a subject line. Estate changes. The message was 3 sentences long. I've had some time to reflect. I think you're making a mistake. We are your children. That should mean something. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the message to my lawyer, CC'd myself, and added a note. Keep the trust locked. No amendments. No exceptions. Jake, for his part, tried a softer approach. He sent me a video on New Year's Day, just him and the grandkids, sitting in the living room. They each held up cards that said things like, "We miss you," and "Come visit soon." The whole thing felt manufactured. Like Alicia had directed the whole thing with a storyboard in her lap. Still, I almost cracked. Almost. But then Jake ruined it at the end. The final message was from him, staring straight at the camera, saying, "Let's put this behind us, Dad. We're willing to forgive everything." Forgive. Like he was the wrong party. Like it was me who needed to be absolved for finally standing up and demanding some basic human decency. That word snapped me right back into focus. I didn't reply. I didn't call. I didn't post anything cryptic on Facebook. But I did one thing. I called my financial advisor and asked how soon we could launch the scholarship fund I'd been planning. Not just in Jake and Stephanie's names, but in spite of them. We launched the Alan Kent Respect Through Action Fund in early February. Each scholarship came with a mission statement, awarded to students who treat others with dignity regardless of status, wealth, or background. Respect is not earned through titles, it's shown through actions. The press release got a little local buzz. Some articles. A photo in the city paper. Enough that someone at Stephanie's firm saw it. I know because 2 weeks later, I got a card in the mail. Not a call. Not an email. A card. With handwriting I recognized instantly. It said, maybe I didn't realize how far I drifted. I'm sorry. No signature. But it was her. I knew it. I didn't respond. Because apologies without change are just words. And here's the part that really stung for them. The more public my philanthropy became, the more awkward things got for them. Jake's clients asked if he was related to the Alan Kent Fund guy. Stephanie's colleagues started bringing it up in meetings. She was proud at first, until they asked why her name wasn't on the board of directors. Why her father was doing all this without her. And she had no answer. Meanwhile, I got invited to speak at community centers, schools, local tech panels. People who had no idea about the years I spent scraping by suddenly wanted to hear my story. Not because of the money, but because I had finally stood up, walked away, and chosen peace over performance. But the story doesn't end there. Not by a long shot. Because this past summer, I got an invitation in the mail. Elegant envelope. Embossed lettering. Fancy return address. And when I opened it, it was for Stephanie's wedding. To a man I'd never heard of. And under guests of the bride, in neat cursive handwriting, was my name. But beside it, in parentheses, no +1. That was the part that got me. Not the elegant print or the absurd return address from some swanky country club in New York. Not even that the groom was someone I'd never met or heard of. But those 3 little words in parentheses, deliberate, sharp, and cold. Not +1 optional or we're keeping it intimate. Just a flat denial. She knew I was seeing someone. I hadn't publicized it, but Linda had been in a few tagged photos with me at charity events and local community nights. And yeah, maybe I was a bit slow to mention her because of the kids. Part of me still held out a naive hope that things would get better with them. That maybe, just maybe, if I left enough space, they'd start to reach across it. But this was Stephanie's way of making it clear. I was tolerated, not included. I was welcome, as long as I knew my place. I didn't RSVP right away. I let the invitation sit on my kitchen counter for a week. Then 2. Linda noticed it the second time she came over. "You gonna go?" she asked gently, sipping her tea. "I'm not sure," I replied, trying to sound neutral, even as that familiar knot started forming in my chest. She looked at me for a long moment, then said, "Alan, you've spent your entire life giving people the benefit of the doubt. But I've never met a man who gets treated like furniture more consistently and still brings flowers to the people sitting on him." That one hit hard. Not because it was mean, but because it was true. So I made a decision. I called the number listed on the RSVP card and asked to speak with whoever was handling the guest list. It turned out to be a wedding planner named Melissa, bubbly voice, overly cheerful, probably paid far too much. "Yes, Mr. Kent," she chirped. "How can I help you?" "I'd like to RSVP in person," I said. "And I'd like to cover the cost of a few last-minute changes. I understand the reception is seated, correct?" "Oh, yes, it is. But we're a bit tight on the guest count." "No problem," I said smoothly. "I'll pay for a full additional table. In fact, make it 2. And don't worry, we won't require special meals. Just make sure they're close to the head table." Understood, she said after a pause. And the names of your guests? I'll email them to you. But make sure my table cards say Alan Kent, founder, AK Systems. Big enough that they can't be missed. I hung up before she could ask any more questions. Then I sent the list. George, Linda, Mark, 2 scholarship recipients. My old mentor from the tech incubator who used to buy me lunch when I couldn't afford it. And the librarian who used to let me stay after hours to work on my business plan. I called each of them personally. No one said no. When the day came, I wore a tailored navy suit, not flashy, just enough to say I belong here. Linda wore a deep green dress and a smile that made her look 10 years younger. We arrived just as the string quartet started tuning, and sure enough, a few heads turned when the man who was supposedly broke, forgettable, and irrelevant showed up with a small entourage. I could see Stephanie from across the lawn. She looked stunning, I'll admit. Classic, elegant, almost regal in her gown. Her eyes locked onto me, then darted to Linda, then to the 5 other guests trailing behind us. I gave a small nod. No wave. No big scene. Just presence. Jake arrived a few minutes later, already red in the face when he spotted me. He pulled Stephanie aside, and I watched them whisper furiously near the bar, both shooting glances in my direction like I was a roach that crawled out during the toast. During the ceremony, we stayed silent, respectful. When the officiant asked who gave the bride away, it was their mother who stood, just as she always had, polished and detached. She didn't even glance my way. That was fine. The real moment came during the reception. They sat me 2 tables over from the main wedding party, just like I asked. Not at the back. Not by the restrooms. Just close enough to be seen. And when the DJ announced the toasts, I saw Stephanie stiffen as my name was called. I stood up slowly, holding my glass. I'll keep this brief, I said, voice steady but strong. Stephanie, Jake, you've both grown into intelligent, accomplished people. And I mean that. You've built careers, lives, and now, Steph, a marriage. I hope it's a happy one. A few guests clapped politely. But I wasn't finished. I wasn't asked to speak today, and I won't overstay my welcome. But I will say this, there was a time when I thought I needed to earn my children's respect. When I believed that maybe, if I worked hard enough, made enough sacrifices, or gave enough, one day, you'd see me. I paused, letting it hang in the air. But the truth is, I spent too long measuring my worth by the approval of people who only looked at what I lacked, never at what I gave. I raised 2 kids on my own, during the hardest years of my life. I built a company from nothing. And I helped dozens of students, friends, and neighbors get on their feet. That is the legacy I'm proud of. I turned slightly, gesturing to my table. These people here? They saw me when I had nothing. They valued me when there was no estate, no startup, no title. And because of that, they're my family now too. Stephanie looked like someone had poured cold water down her back. Jake had his mouth open, halfway through some comeback he never got to say. Their mother stared daggers, but I didn't flinch. To the bride and groom, I finished, raising my glass. May your future be bright, and may you never forget that respect can't be inherited. It must be earned. I sat down. Applause. Not thunderous, but enough. From my table. From a few scattered guests who had started connecting the dots. From the groom's father, who nodded at me like he'd just learned something important. I didn't linger much after that. I stayed for cake. Danced once with Linda. Gave Mark a pat on the back. Then we quietly exited while the party was still in full swing. I left behind a card on the gift table. Inside was a donation confirmation, $50,000 to a domestic abuse shelter in Stephanie's name. No sarcasm. Just a final statement. That night, I sat on my porch with Linda, sipping hot cider under the stars. No calls came. No angry texts. Just silence. Peaceful, honest silence. And for the first time in decades, I felt done. Not defeated. Done. Like a man who had finally closed a chapter with grace and walked into a new one on his own terms. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can say isn't, I forgive you. It's, I no longer need you. And I didn't. Not anymore.